Morning, everybody. Let me begin by saying, go Eagles. Really, that's it? Just I was also confronted by a Patriots fan this morning who said, a little love over here. They don't need our love. They're just fine. The Eagles game is the second most exciting thing happening today. I just got a text from somebody over there who says it looks like about 100, not counting our folks, 100 new people showed up this morning. Right? What a beginning. 100 visitors in 1 week. Don't think we have quite 100 visitors here this morning, but if you are visiting, as Marilyn said, we are excited to welcome you as well. So one of the things that we're going to be doing over the next several weeks in Mount Laurel and here at Hope is something we're calling This Is Us, where we're going to be highlighting who we are as a church. And so it's important that both folks, both campuses, hear this. For some of you who have been around for a while, none of this will sound particularly new. Going forward, for those folks, it will all be brand new as we introduce ourselves to them. And so I wrote this out. I vamped on it first service and ran late and got in trouble. So I'm going to be better about just reading what I wrote. So the first thing we're addressing this morning in This Is Us is what it means to be a campus. What do we mean when we say we're one church with two locations or two campuses? So 27 years ago, the associate minister of Haddonfield United Methodist Church, along with about 15 volunteers, was sent to start a new church. The people of Haddonfield committed resources to cover the startup expenses and my salary for 2 years. The idea was not to create a church like Haddonfield, but to create a church that might attract people who weren't attracted to a more traditional style of worship as well as doing church. So from the first moment Hope started, it was independent of the Haddonfield Church, except for my salary for those first 2 years and the gratitude of the people of Hope to the people of Haddonfield Methodist Church. Today, we're doing something that is very different. What we're doing in Mount Laurel is an extension of Hope, not separate from Hope. Hope Mount Laurel will have the same lead team, the same staff, the same feel or DNA, the same vision and values as Voorhees. All of the ministries we do in Voorhees are open to folks to participate in from Mount Laurel. In addition, we will very quickly be developing ministries in Mount Laurel, small groups, maybe an alpha, perhaps MOPS. All of that is in planning stages for Mount Laurel, and all of the folks here are welcome to the things that we'll be doing there. Today at the Harrington School, there are about 70 of our members who are transforming that school into a church with rooms for children and an area for hospitality and, of course, a worship space. Our objective is that this will be the last week where all of this is being done by folks from Voorhees, that people from Mount Laurel will very quickly get involved and engaged. As Pastor Rick has been telling our launch team, your job is to work yourself out of a job. And so we want folks there to take this on. A couple of phrases you're going to be hearing in the next year and probably beyond is, and you've already heard, we are one church with two locations. We are one church with two locations, which just is a way to describe the inherent unity or oneness of these two congregations, these two locations. The other thing is that we want them to be identifiable but not identical, so that the spirit of this place, the energy of this place that folks talk about all the time when you arrive, where you feel the hospitality, where you're warmly welcomed, where guests are expected, where people are encouraged to take all of that that is the essence of who we are will be fully evident there. The way that we express them may vary. And so just based on the realities on the ground, some things will probably look different. One last thing. This is all new, and this is all new to every one of us. We're all figuring this out. I started a new church. I never started a campus before. And so there's going to be some experimentation as we learn how to do this. And we're studying and have been studying best practices in order to have the two locations thrive, sharing one vision and one culture. So there's some things that we're going to be trying. Like this, what I'm doing right now is an experiment. Announcements. We'll be doing announcements on videos, so it's the same announcements in both locations. And so some of these changes you're going to love. And some, not so much. So two things I ask of you in this process. One is communicate. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you feel. Let us know, hey, I like this, or I don't get this, or talk to us so we have some information as we're planning things to know, what's working for folks where and so forth. Be kind, but, communicate. And the second thing is give us some grace. So there's going to be some changes going on, and it's not going to be exactly, for those of you who have been around a little bit longer, things might not look exactly the way they did, and we'll be trying new things. We've always done that. That's not really all that new. We've always experimented. We're not the same church today we were 5 years ago, much less 27 years ago. And so change is normative here, but it's always with a single vision. And it's true here, and it will be true there. That we are all about connecting people to God through a growing relationship with Jesus, and connecting people to each other in authentic Christian community, and connecting the church to the world to be salt and light. So that goes unchanged. Thus endeth, this is us. Awesome. There they are. We had a baby. I've been telling folks, I really want to be there, but somebody's got to take care of Mama. So, okay. So, my whole life, I have been aware of a person named Jesus. From the time I was little, I heard about Jesus. I heard about him in Sunday school classes. I heard about him in stories and in songs that we sang. Songs like, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of... Anybody know it? Red and yellow, black and white. For those of you who grew up in Sunday school, you know that one. For if you're new, that may have sounded like a cult or some weird thing that just broke out. But, we grew up with those songs. So, knowing about Jesus. And as a child, I had some images, childlike images of Jesus. He looked thin and he looked rather tall. He had long brown hair down to his shoulders and a beard. He glowed. There was always a glow over Jesus. And it was the 60s, so, to me, Jesus was a hippie, because that's what hippies look like. So that was my image of Jesus as a child. As I grew and became a young teen, my understanding of Jesus began to change. Oh, the other thing about Jesus when I was a child was Jesus was born in a stable at Christmas, and how coincidental that he would have been born on Christmas. I thought that was cool. And then, like 4 months later, he was a man dying on a cross. So it was magical. That was my child understanding of Jesus. So as a teen, as I began to mature and began to understand the story better and so forth, I began to think about Jesus differently. This was a guy who was a radical teacher and a Messiah. And at some point in my early teens, it was presented to me that Jesus was the one who would forgive my sins. And even at that age, I understood that I had sin in my life. And that he would become the leader of my life if I invited him in. And so I did, and I accepted Jesus at that age. As my teen years went on and I became an older teen, as older teens are wont to do, I became more skeptical, questioning the things that my parents and adults were saying about the way things worked and the world and faith and so forth. And so I began to question this faith. I had serious questions, more adult questions about who this Jesus is and why we proclaim to follow him and so forth. And the people I was hanging out with had even additional questions that I hadn't thought of. And so all of these questions were in my mind, and like I said, I was skeptical. The thing that kept me from leaving, however, the thing that kept me from abandoning the faith was that I had adult people around me who seemed to have this deep connection to and conviction about this Jesus. And these were people I respected. They were smart people. They were wise people. They weren't just, blind followers. And there was something about their lives that was compelling to me. And so even though I was very skeptical, I was very intrigued by these folks. And so I began to ask them my questions and was surprised in many cases and impressed in many cases by the wisdom of their responses, the thoughtfulness of their faith. And so I began to practice spiritual disciplines. I didn't call it that. I didn't think about it that way. But what I was doing was I was beginning to read the Bible for myself, particularly the New Testament. I began to pray on a regular basis, and not just, God, thank you for this and thank you for that, but God, why this? What's going on here? What am I supposed to do with this? Those kinds of deep questions that I was bringing to God. I remember my freshman year of college. The first week, it was freshman orientation, so it was all freshmen there, and my roommate was going to be an upperclassman, so I had the dorm room to myself that first week. And so in the evening, when all of the activities were done, I'd go back to my room, and I decided I was going to read one of the Gospels, just beginning to end, just like you would read a book. And so I took the Gospel of Matthew, and I just began to read the story. And as I read, I became more and more enamored with Jesus and who he was and what he said and what he did. And by the time I got to the crucifixion story, by the trial and the crucifixion, I was offended. How could they be doing that to this man? And then read about the resurrection. And everything changed for me. When I had this encounter with Jesus, he leapt off the page and became real for me, profoundly real. Everything didn't change in an instant, but things began to change gradually, and they've been changing ever since. What we're going to be doing over the next couple of months, really, is we're going to do 3 series. All 3 series are about Jesus. We're going to be talking about who Jesus the person, who he was, and some characteristics. We're going to be talking about what he said, so the things that Jesus taught, and then about what he did, the implications of Jesus' life. And so that's what we're going to be doing together, starting with who Jesus was. So there was a poll taken in 2015 by the Barna Group where they were trying to poll Americans' view of Jesus. And one of the questions they asked people was, do you believe that Jesus was a real human being that lived on earth? Do you believe that Jesus was a real human being who lived on earth? 92% of all Americans believe that. And what I was intrigued by as you drill down into those numbers, that even the millennial generation, who is the most spiritually skeptical generation in American history, even millennials, 87% of them believe that there was a person named Jesus. And so who is this person who walked the planet some 2,000 years ago? What are some of the characteristics? And what I want to talk about in the time that we have this morning is that with Jesus, there were no outsiders. With Jesus, there were no outsiders. It's clear from the Gospels that Jesus was totally comfortable hanging out with what the Pharisees affectionately called the scum. Literally called them the scum of the earth kind of people. Jesus had friends in low places. The thieves, the liars, prostitutes, adulterers, the sick, the lame, the blind, all of those who were considered the unclean by the self-righteous of the day. Jesus not only was comfortable with, he chose to hang out with. There were no outsiders for him. In fact, Jesus, even when he would tell stories, would make some of those folks the heroes in the story. You know the story, even if you're unfamiliar with the Bible, you've probably heard about the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan is a story about a person who the Jews couldn't stand. They didn't like the Samaritans because the Samaritans had a misunderstanding of the Jewish faith. They corrupted the Jewish faith. And so good Jews hated Samaritans even more than they hated Gentiles. And so Jesus is telling this story and making the Samaritan the hero in the story. There were no outsiders for Jesus. Here's the takeaway. And I've got a lot to say, so you're not going to remember most of it. Here's the thing that I'd like you to take away. It's not that Jesus doesn't care about what we do. It's that Jesus knows who we can become when we choose to follow him. It's not that Jesus doesn't care what we do. It's that Jesus cares more about who we can become when we choose to follow him. So a couple of examples. One of the groups that the Pharisees would talk about, they put them together. It was kind of two groups. And it was sinners and tax collectors. Sinners and tax collectors. Which was hard for my dad, because my dad spent his whole career as a tax collector. He worked for the Department of Taxation in New Jersey, and so he struggled with Jesus on this. Well, not on Jesus, with Jesus, but, reading about sinners and tax collectors. Poor dad. So these were people that you didn't hang out with. They were people who were far from God, and tax collectors were the worst of all because they worked for the Roman government, which you hated, and they extracted money from people, not just the taxes that they owed, but they would use their authority and the power of the Roman government to take more than they were supposed to line their own pockets. And so they were despised. And Jesus would hang out with them. One of his disciples was a tax collector. There's a story, and again, if you grew up in Sunday school, it's a story that has a song connected to it. It's a story about a guy named, wow, good for you. And we all know that Zacchaeus was a wee little man, because we're all Scottish, apparently. Hey, he's a wee little man. So he's this tax collector guy. Jesus is coming to town. Zacchaeus hears about it. He's short. He can't see over the crowd. I feel his pain. And so he climbs up in a tree to be able to see Jesus. And Jesus is walking by. He sees Zacchaeus. He stops, and he says, Zacchaeus, let's do lunch. Right? At your place. And Zacchaeus is thrilled. He comes down out of the tree, and off they go, Jesus and the tax collector, to his house. And the self-righteous are looking at this going, you have got to be kidding me. What's going on? Doesn't he even know what this guy is? He's supposed to be so sweet. He doesn't get who this guy is. And Jesus is nonplussed by this. Goes to the guy's house, has lunch. I bet they had a great lunch. I bet they had a profound discussion. I know they did, because it says at the end of lunch that Zacchaeus stands before the group and says, I will return any money I took that I wasn't supposed to take. And not only that, many times over is what I'll return. And Jesus' response is, today, salvation has come to this house. It's not that he didn't care that Zacchaeus was taking money that he wasn't supposed to take. It wasn't that he didn't care. It's that he knew who Zacchaeus could become if he would follow him. And so he hung out with him, and he shared with him. You know, the Bible says that it's more difficult for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. We're rich people. You're a rich person. If you woke up this morning and didn't have to think, first thing when you woke up is, I wonder if I'll have anything to eat today, you're a rich person. If you didn't have to think, I wonder if the water I'm going to drink is clean enough to drink, you're a rich person. If last night the cold didn't affect you because you were in a warm place, you're a rich person. So we're rich people, according to the standards of most of the rest of the world, or at least much of the rest of the world. It's harder for us because our wealth, our affluence, can become a kind of protection, we think. We live in an illusion that what we have will protect us from what life will bring. Perhaps. I can control things. I can manage things. I'm good on my own. It also creates, particularly among some of the more wealthy, it creates a kind of skepticism around people coming around them, because so many people are seeking to use you and to extract money from you and so forth. And so we have a certain skepticism that keeps people out. And it can make us look hard and cold. And I understand it's particularly bad in the Northeast. When you talk to people in the South, you know, they talk about people in the Northeast, and they don't like us much, you know, like they're mean. They say mean things, and they're loud, and they're obnoxious. I lived in the South for a while. You know the difference. It's not that they're any less mean or any less obnoxious. They just do it in such a sweet way. Bless his heart. He's dumb as a post. You know, as long as you say bless their heart in front of it, you're good. We just go, you're an idiot. What was I just saying? There's a point to that. I got lost in that. So we put up walls. And Jesus sees past the wall. He sees the hurt. He sees the fear. He sees the unrealized dreams. He sees the mistakes and the things that we regret and the people that we wish we were. And he is good hanging out with us despite all of that stuff, because he sees who we can become when we choose to follow him. Another example of this, has to do with another group of people that were outsiders, outcasts, the scum, and those were people with sexual sin. Jesus seemed quite comfortable hanging out with people who were involved in sexual sin. The Bible tells us that he was around prostitutes. Prostitutes came around him, adulterers and so forth. And Jesus saw past that. There's a powerful story in John chapter 8 where a woman caught in adultery is brought before Jesus and thrown at his feet, and they say, all right, what do we do with her? And what the Bible tells us is that they were trying to trap Jesus. They're ready to stone her to death because that was the law from Moses, that if you're caught in adultery, you should be stoned. And so they're saying, should we stone her to death or should we let her go? And if Jesus said, well, go ahead and stone her, he would have said, you're no different than anybody else. You know, Mr. Love guy, you're just the same as we are. Or if he said, well, let's let her go. Oh, you don't care about the law. Good for you. We have to care about the law. You don't care about the law. But what did Jesus say instead? Let the one who's without sin throw that first stone. So he turned the spotlight from her to me. Oh, my sin. Oh, my shortcomings. Oh, my faults. And when I start looking at myself and take my eyes off of others, it's a different story, right? It's not that Jesus doesn't care what we do, but he knows who we can become. And so Jesus says to this woman, when everybody drops their stones and walks away, Jesus says, who condemns you? And she looks around and says, no one. And he said, neither do I. Now go. Go into your life. Go forward. Go into a new future and leave the sin behind. Leave the stuff behind. It's a powerful story of who Jesus is. Ironically, the woman was caught in adultery, and so people rightly ask the question, so where was the guy? Why wasn't he there? Good question. The other irony is we are living in a time right now in this country where it's the men who are being exposed for sexual sin. Right? Anybody paying attention to this? Anybody aware of this? Okay. Somebody yelled out "Me Too" in the first service, right? All of that going on. These men who, because of their power and their prestige and their standing and the way that they were viewed by people around them, exploited that to, at the very least, humiliate women, at the very worst, to abuse them and harm them. And so we as a country are awakened to this in some new ways, perhaps. Not that anybody ever really imagined it was okay. But my question is, how are we now looking at those men who are there on the ground with people around with rocks ready to destroy them? I'm not suggesting that their actions aren't deplorable and worthy of condemnation. But who can they become? Who can they become? It's one of the things that in our culture these days, we are in a culture of condemnation and outrage. Always looking for the latest person or group that we can be outraged by and condemn. And we pick up our stones of social media and we use our voices to beat them relentlessly. It's not that we don't care about what people do, but can we see them through Jesus' eyes? Sin is a hideous thing. Many times our sins, we start out by thinking we can control them, whatever they are. And then subtly and the way that evil works is suddenly they are controlling us. And that's how it works with sexual sin. So, just a quick word, particularly to the men in the room. If this is an area of struggle for you, don't feel like you have to do it alone. There is an industry in our country called pornography, a multi-billion-dollar industry. And there are men who are trapped in it, right? And you carry around shame and guilt, and you have tried to give it up, perhaps. There are other activities that you might be involved in that you feel remorseful about and shamed about and so forth, but you hide it because if anybody found out, you would be on the ground with people ready to throw rocks. And what I want to say is that, like anything else, there is salvation, there is redemption for you. There's a group I know of that meets at a church in Mount Laurel, actually, Celebrate Recovery, and one of the recovery groups there is for those who deal with sexual addictions of various kinds. And I know about that group because I know some men who are a part of that group. There is an online ministry called XXX Church, XXXchurch.com, that's there to help men who feel trapped in this struggle with pornography. It's not that God doesn't care about what we do, but he sees who we can become. One last thing, one last story, and this one may sound odd in light of what we've been looking at so far, but this is from the Gospel of Matthew, and the 19th chapter, and the words will be on the screen, which is good because I don't have the words here. Here they are. So it says this: one day, some parents brought their children to Jesus so he could lay his hands on them and pray for them. But his disciples scolded the parents for bothering him. But Jesus said, "Let the children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children." And he placed his hands on their heads and blessed them before he left. Again, a group of people that you wouldn't necessarily equate with Jesus, right? Like, why are children? Because there's no outsiders, including children. And what I love about this story is the parents are bringing their children to have Jesus lay hands on them. And that action continues 2,000 years later. Here at Hope, I see it all the time that parents, even those who have left the church or never had church as part of their lives, who are wanting to bring their kids up with some faith, with some values that they see in Jesus, and so they come bringing their children to Jesus, and it's a cool thing. A few years ago, I was out in the lobby after a service, and a mom came up to me with her son. He couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. And she said, "I just got to tell you, we were standing over there a minute ago, and I leaned down to my son, and I said, pointing to you, 'Do you know who that is?' And the little boy said, 'That's Jesus.'" That kid's now on staff. But here's the thing. To a child, You represent what you claim to believe. You represent Jesus. Your life, your words, your actions represent to them Jesus. And you're not worthy, and I'm not worthy of that. But here's the thing. Jesus looks at us through a new eye, in a new way. Not who we are right now, but who we are becoming as we follow him. That's the person that I follow. Let's stand together for closing prayer. So, Lord, thank you that you see us for who we can become. That the things that we do that are far from you, the things that we do that we hide in the darkness, the fears that we have, the regrets that we have, the heartaches that we have, the brokenness that we might have in our lives, does not offend you. That we are not outsiders to you, that you welcome us in. And that you have a vision for our lives beyond anything we could dream or even imagine. Help us to live into that vision. For our own sake and for the sake of others, we pray. And all God's people agreed and said, have a great week.